Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video, we'll be discussing about quite a few topics that includes the workflow events and how do we keep the human in the workflow for reviewer and approval purposes. And we will also be discussing about checkpoints. So first we will begin with the workflow events. Microsoft Agent Framework uses the event-based system within its workflow feature. These events are published throughout the workflow execution that allow the developers to monitor and debug and control the workflow execution. So again, these events will help us with the observability. You can use these events to debug and auditing purposes. That will let you decouple your workflow logic with your UI logic. That will also keep the context in sync, as well as you can dynamically control the overall workflow execution. So when I see the events, what does it mean? So if I just come over here, if you see here, like let's assume that I have a workflow with three different nodes. It's a sequential workflow with three different nodes here. So first we will begin with the parse text, convert text, and explain text, right? So if you see the events, when you start the workflow, this particular event will trigger. So this will say, hey, like workflow, it's started, and the like workflow status will change from started to in progress, and the executor will get invoked, and that event will get triggered. So basically, like this particular executor will get invoked. Then you will see the executor result. The executor will say like I'm done. Then the next executor will get called. Then it is a results. Then it will get completed. Then finally, like this particular executor will get called its results, and it will get completed. Finally, the workflow itself will get completed. So as you see here, like from one phase to another phase, as the workflow moves, these events will get triggered. That provides a lot of information to us. So for instance, if you see here, so here like we can start a timer saying that hey, like the workflow is started at this particular time, and finally we can say like this workflow took these many seconds or minutes to complete the execution. As well as if at all you wanted to control something, then you can very well do it within these events. So if you see here, we can break down these events into four different categories. So first we will have a workflow lifecycle events. So again, it will say like workflow started, workflow completed, workflow output, error, warning, or whatever is that. All of these events are directly associated with the workflow itself. Then you will have something called a super step. So basically, like you can split the workflow into n number of logical pieces, right? So if you think of this way, so this entire thing, it's a workflow, but let's assume that the parse text and convert text, it's one logical group, and the like this explain text, it's another logical group. So in this particular workflow, in this particular case, you will have two different super step. So again, super step, it's nothing but the logical group, right, of a workflow. So you can also have events for that. Then the executor events. So again, like if I just come over here, we have three different executors. So for each executor, you will have the executor related events. So you can also have that invoked, completed, failed, a run event, response event, and all of these events. Then finally you will also have the request info event. So basically, like when you wanted to get some information externally, then you can use this request info event. If you want to learn more about these events, then you can use this reference article that clearly explains all these events and how do we use these, right? Now we know that what are all these events. We will go back to the Visual Studio and see like how do we use these events. So what we want to do is that we want to build a simple workflow. So basically, like this is the workflow that I want to build, right? So we will be having a simple sequential workflow, exactly the same workflow we are going to build. So first you need to import all the events. These events are part of this agent framework. So you need to import whatever the events that you are interested in. You can import all of these events. So as you see here, like I have three different class, executors. I will be building a simple sequential workflow from parser to converter, convert to the explainer. Then when you say like workflow.run stream, it will emit a lot of events. You can check the type of that particular event. So here I'm saying like if the event is a type of workflow started, then you say workflow started and then like print the workflow ID. If it is status event, you will print the status, like whatever the status right now it has, so we will print that. In this particular case, like all of these events are more of a observability events. You can only print some of these information, extract some of these information from the workflow execution, but there are quite a few events that let you dynamically control the workflow. So now if you just come down here, like likewise, like I captured all the events that I'm interested in: executor invoked, executor convoked, completed, and the like workflow output, workflow failed, workflow failed, executor failed event, or whatever is that. So like whatever I'm interested in, I am going to just log all this information in the console. With that, like let me go and run these. So this one, if I run it here, you see here like it says that workflow started, and this is the workflow ID. Each workflow will have its ID, and the workflow status event occurred in progress, and we extracted some of these events. If you see here, like extraction should happen in the parser executor, right? So if you see here, like executor invoked, ideally like it has to come between invoked and completed. But because like as we are using the async, if I just come over here, this is the async operation, right? So it has to toggle between the main thread and the executor thread. So it is like you cannot really control that. Actually, like it execute in the proper order. So likewise, like we have this executor invoked for the converter. There is some calculation happened, and then like finally we have the result printed here. And then like finally we say like the overall state becomes idle and the workflow finished. So likewise, like you can use these events to capture all the information that you are interested in. So these are all the built-in events, right? We can also have some custom events. So in this case, if you just come over here, I'm going to create something called resume processed event. So I'm going to pass some information. The workflow is going to process the resume, and the like when it processes the resume, it is going to emit this. So it is going to just emit the processed resume processed event. This event will have these information: candidate name and the score. So if I just come over here, so these are all the candidates that I'm having, right? So when you start the workflow, if I just start the workflow run stream, it is exactly the same thing here, right? Only thing is that this time around I will be looking for this particular event, resume processed event, because like when the workflow executes, if I just come over here to the to the executor, here I'm saying that hey, like you throw this particular event. So instead of just a context dot send a message or output yield output, I also can send a event. So I'm just saying like trigger a event. These are all the values that you will be exposing to, because like if I just come over here, there is a constructor that takes all of these information. If you just see like the candidate name and the score, it takes. So that's why like I'm passing all of these information to this particular class, and like that will be created as an event that I can capture here, and I can print these values here. So now if I run it here, if you see here, if you just come over here, if you see here like workflow started, workflow in progress, and like these are all the events reported. Like as the workflow executed, it triggered all of these custom events, and that can also be captured. Now next thing is that we will be looking into the possible event. So basically like using these events, you can control the execution. So like let's say like I have a refund processor. So the user will be asking for a refund. If it is under $100, that will be auto approved. But if it is more than $100, then the human needs to decide whether they wanted to approve it or not. So if you see here, I have a data class. So data class, it's called refund request. It has the order ID and the amount. And if you see here, like I have a refund processor, it has the handler class and the response handler class. So what is the difference between handler class? Handler class we already know. Like when you make a call by passing all this information, the handler will automatically get called. But what is this response handler? So when you use this request info, if you see here, hey, first when it is less than $100, we will send back to the caller saying that, hey, this request it's approved, auto approved. But if it is greater than $100, then we don't want to send a message. Rather, like we wanted to request for information. When you say request for information, it will, the workflow will know that, hey, like I need a information from an external system. It can be a human being or it can be an external system that will pass me that information. With that information, I will execute the rest of the task as a part of this particular workflow. So here, like I'm saying, like a request info, the request data, I need to pass two information, request data and response type, right? I will be passing this data. It's like what it's passed to this particular executor. I will be sending the same information. So basically it's nothing but the order ID and the amount that will be passed. And the response type, I wanted to get the response from the external system or a human saying that approved or rejected or whatever is that, right? So I will be expecting the response of type string. That's what I'm saying here. So when you have this, when somebody responded back to this particular request, then this response handler will get called. So now if you see here, now here, like feedback we have, if the feedback is yes, then the status will be approved, otherwise it will be rejected, right? So now like when the response handler will get called, whenever somebody is responding back to your request, then this response handler will get called. So now if I just come over here, this workflow, I am starting a workflow with a message, order ID is whatever is that, amount is $500 I am sending. So now what will happen is that the workflow will get started, the executor will get invoked, and the executor, when it sees $500, it will come over here. When it sees $500, it will request for information. So this particular event will get called. So if the event of a type request info event, then what I want to do is that I want to print this message in the console saying that, hey, human approval needed for this particular amount, do you approve? Say yes or no. Then the response will be captured here. The response will be sent back to the workflow again. So now I'm just capturing this. If I just come over here, the way you send the response back to the workflow dot send a response streaming, like whatever the response that you have. So basically, like it will have two things. One is the request ID and the response. So that will be part of this pending response. I will be passing it to the workflow. Now workflow will have the request ID, like what is the like for each request will have its own ID, and for that particular request, what is the response or received, both will be combined and sent back to the workflow using this particular method, send a response streaming. When we call this method send a response streaming with the request ID and the response, this particular method will get called, the response handler will get called. Now you will have two information, one the original request and the feedback. So based on which we can the rest of the workflow will get executed. Now let me go and clear this console. Now let me go and run this program. So if you see here, it says that hey, like a human approval needed for $500. Do you approve or no? I say like I approve. Now it says that hey, like the final outcome for this one, human approved. Now if I say again, now if I say no, it will say is that it is rejected by the human. This workflow, it's not a static workflow. Basically it's a dynamic workflow, right? Though like we pass the a decision in the console, which we don't do it in the real world, but for a purpose of demonstrating, I'm just showcasing that the workflow can get the response from an external system. In this case, like it is the same console, I'm just passing this information, but it shows the ability for the workflow to get the response from the external system. Let's move forward and discuss about the checkpoint. So checkpoint, it's a way of storing the workflow state. Say like you have a long running workflow, you wanted to pause the workflow and restart the workflow. At the time, you have to save the state and reload the state before you can run the workflow again. or like the system crashes, you want to continue the workflow from where it left off, then you have to save the state of this workflow. So what are all the instances where the states get saved or checkpoint get created, right? So you think of like a workflow with the different life events. So say like the workflow initiated, workflow paused, workflow resumed, workflow completed. So all these kind of events will trigger a checkpoint creation. And what gets saved in the checkpoint? So typically the executor state and the message, like say you want to send a message from one executor to another executor, that message gets stored. And you can have a shared state, and you will also have a pending request to say like you want to pass the workflow for a user input, then you will be having the pending request. So all this information will get stored in the checkpoint. Now let's go back to the Visual Studio Code and see how do we implement the checkpoint. So if you see here, like I'm using the file checkpoint storage. Likewise, you also have a in-memory checkpoint storage, and if at all you wanted to have a custom checkpoint storage, you can very well create one. But in this case, I will be using the file checkpoint storage to store the checkpoint. Basically, it's a JSON file that will get stored, and this is the folder where I wanted to store my JSON file, basically the state file, right? So if you see here the workflow by itself, it's a pretty simple flow. You run the workflow, it is going to request for a user feedback by using this particular data class here. So if I just come over here, so what I am doing here is that I am creating a file checkpoint storage using the path that we mentioned. Then I am creating a workflow. If you see here, this is the only node that it will have, and I am creating the workflow with the checkpoint, and I use the file checkpoint storage class here. So with that, I created a workflow, and when I run the workflow, it will just go here, right? And it will ask for a user input. Now at this moment, the workflow will get paused, right? So now up to this point, it will create two JSON file. When we initialize the workflow, it will create the very first JSON file, and then when it reach the the user input state, then it is going to create the second state file. Now if you see here, I'm getting all the checkpoints. I'm getting the last checkpoint ID here, and I will store this information with me. Now I am deleting this particular workflow. Basically, I'm just deleting the instance of this workflow. Let's assume that at this point in time, the system crashed, the workflow instance got destroyed. Now I don't have anything. All I have is this checkpoint ID, right? Now what I will do is that I will create a workflow again, exactly the same configuration, right? Because we wanted to have the same workflow. Now what I want to do is that I want to rehydrate the workflow. Now what I want to do is that I want to bring the new workflow instance to the old state. So the way I do, it's I will run the workflow by using the run stream, but I will be passing the checkpoint ID. So technically what it will do is that it will go back and look at the checkpoint files that we have. It will rerun the workflow and bring the new workflow instance to the old state. Now it will reach the request info event, just because we are asking for the user input here, right? Request info. Now it will reach that point. Now I will capture the request ID here. Now what I will do is that if there is a request ID, then I want to call the sender response or streaming by passing the request ID, and the the response I hard coded here saying approved. So what it will do is that it will take that request ID, and then it will pass the response as approved. Now it will go back here, right? So it will go back to the human feedback. The human feedback will say decision, it's approved for the amount, whatever it's that, right? Now with that, we will be completing the workflow. Now let me go and run this flow here. If you see here, we started the workflow, and the workflow passed for a user request, and we created a checkpoint. Now the system crashed. Now we resume the workflow by using the checkpoint ID that we created. Now we have the request ID here, and it is approved. So now if I just go here to the temp folder, so if you see here, so these are all the checkpoints are created for me. So if I just open here, so this is iteration 2. Now let me find the iteration one. Yeah, this is the iteration first. So this is the very first time the JSON file got created, right? So it is pending for the user input, right? Now this is the very first time the state file got created. Now this is iteration 2, right? So when we rehydrate using the checkpoint ID, this will reach this particular state. At that time there is going to be another JSON file get created. Now with that, like we say approved, so that is also captured here. That is part of a message that you will see here. Then finally the workflow got completed here, because like there is nothing pending, there is no message, there is no pending, there is no shared state as well. Now the workflow got completed. So now I don't want to have the hard coded approval, so I want to combine both the checkpoint and the external approval together in a workflow, right? So now let's go and have a look at that. So if you see here, this is exactly the same workflow, but if you see here, instead of hard coding that approval, what I want to do is that I want to ask for the input and I will pass that input. So it's very simple. So now let me go and run this program. So if you see here, it is asking for the user input. Now let's say I approve this. So it says that the final decision it's approved for this particular amount. Now let me go and run it again. This time I will say deny. So it says that the final decision it's deny. So this is how you can combine both the checkpoint and the external approval system together. Now what I want to do is that I don't want to do everything in the console, rather like I wanted to replicate the real world use case, right? Now let me go and use this particular program. Now let me go and run this program. So if you see here, let me maximize this. So if you see here, it is saying that refund approval required. So here it says that amount it's this is the order number, reason is this, whatever is that. So here you can say approve or deny or partial approve or whatever is that. Now if you see that human approved for a refund, whatever is that, order number, whatever is that, and amount, whatever is that. Now it also displays all the checkpoint information here. Now if you see here, like I'm doing everything through the console again. Now think of this way, like there will be two set of a people. The first set of a person who will be raising for a refund request, and there is going to be a second set of a people who will be approving this request. Now let's see how do we do that. Now let me go and run this program. So if you see here, like we are running our program locally using the fast API. Now let me go and open this. So let's assume that the user it's raising for a refund request for order ID 101. The reason it's defective, right? So now let's assume that you are another user who will be raising for a refund request for something for damaged, right? So now we have two different refund requests. Now approver comes in, he can approve or he can deny, right? So everything it's done through fast API. So what it does is that behind the scenes it uses the workflow. Now we can go back to the Visual Studio and see like what has happened behind the scenes. So if you just come over here, you will see all these API calls here. And if you see here, like it is making a call to the task and performing the decision. Like when you click on the approve or deny, this particular endpoint will get called. Now again, let me go here. Now if I try to add one more item here, 3, say like 500, if I just come over here, so it is just going to create a refund here. So behind the scenes what it will do is that it will create a entry in the task.json. Like I'm not using the database, but like you can very well use the database to store all the refund request. Consider this as a refund request. So somebody raised a request for order number 3 for the reason is this, somebody needs to approve that. Now as a approver, you will come over here, you approve or deny whatever is that, you click on that. Then again, like when you click on that, this particular task will get called and the decision will be made. So if you just come over here, all this information will be stored in the checkpoint file. So that's how like we are able to pass and retrieve the workflow and execute the workflow. If we just go back to the code again, it is the pretty simple code, right? So first of you see here, like this is where like we are storing the checkpoint. And if I just come over here, it is exactly the same kind of a workflow that we have here, right? So if I just come over here, we just build the workflow as the way we did it, right? And then like when we want to run the workflow, we will just run stream, use the run stream. And then like whenever we wanted to make a decision, right, so what we need to do, we need to do the checkpoint, we use the checkpoint, and we will pass the approval, right? So we will pass the approval, so this is where like we will pass the decision here. So that's how you can build the real world workflows and integrate with your APIs. Using this kind of a pattern, you can very well build the really powerful workflows that can be integrated with your application. Now finally we will see how do we use the observability. In one of the previous video, I already discussed about the observability. So if you see here, exactly the same thing, it's what we are going to apply here. We will have a span. The span will contain all the relevant information. So we will make use of this span to extract all the information. So now let's go back and see how do we do this. So now let me go and clear this console. So let me run it. If you see here, it is going to create a text file for me. So if we just come over here, so this is what we have here. Like if I go to the program again, this is a pretty simple program, simple sequential workflow from writer to SEO to the editor. And this is what I know we are interested in, right? So if you just come over here, it says that, hey, like initially we started the build process that took about, this much time. Then the orchestrator, basically the workflow, send a message to the initial executor, and this is the message passed, and the this writer respond back to the orchestrator. So the orchestrator send a message to the SEO, all this information. Now SEO send back to orchestrator, orchestrator send back to editor, editor completed, and it sent back to the orchestrator, orchestrator received, finally we printed. So if you see this, you can tell the complete story, right? So you can always use the observability for this particular purpose. So if you think of this way, on the one hand you have the events, on the other hand you have the observability. Which one to use? So basically the events are not necessarily meant for observability, though that can be used to export some of these information. It serves a different purpose. You can use the events for observability, you can use the events to control your workflow, you can use the events to calculate the percentage of task completed. All of this can be done with events. On the other hand, observability, it's the industry standard that captures the telemetry across the execution. So you can use both of these for your observability. So that's all I have for this video. Thank you for watching.